Whenever it comes time to talk shit on Nintendo, there's always a small part of me that dies. Throughout the entire history of the gaming industry, they have solidified themselves as the Walt Disney of video games. They created and owned so many amazing games and properties, and the reason I started this video off with that intro was just to put into perspective the sheer magnitude of what this company means, and if you know anything about them, you know that I didn't even sum up half of their legacy. I could if I wanted, but it would probably take forever. And especially in this day where most of the big developers like to play it safe and seem to have a severe aversion to taking any sort of risk, they still pride themselves on being different and trying to push new ideas. But, as with any company, they're stupid, and I don't like them. And I'm glad I mentioned Disney, because Disney is very much not perfect either. The comparison works on so many levels, and I knew that when I made it, and that makes me smart. And for the longest time I knew that I would one day make a video on many of the things that are wrong with Nintendo. Now let me contextualize this a little bit. I was always the weird kid growing up, to the point where it felt like these guys were my only friends. Nintendo was literally so dear to me that I got angry at people who didn't like it. It was a matter of general fanboyism combined with me being a walking psychiatric disorder, so yeah, when I say that I loved them, that's not just a throwaway comment, that was real. And it's only in the last few years in my slightly more sane adulthood that I can be objective and openly admit that Nintendo was on some bullshit. And some of this is just nitpicking and biased. Some of it is based in boomer nostalgia, but some are a little more serious. So stay tuned, because the day of reckoning has come. Now, Nintendo is not just a game developer. As you all know, Nintendo produces their own hardware. Now that on its own is actually not really that bad. Except that Nintendo has had a long history of having super specialty Nintendo accessories, and I'm not talking about things like controllers or cosmetics. I'm talking about things like power cords and video output cables. To refer to a rival platform, PlayStation often had cables that were extremely easy to replace, like you can find another one at Best Buy if you lose it. Sometimes the cables are even interchangeable between different PlayStation consoles altogether. With Nintendo, if you lose a cable, a lot of the time you'd probably have to special order that shit or something. Not to mention the power cords always have those dipshit AC adapters that either end up on the floor or cover up any surrounding electrical sockets. Again, look at PlayStation. The AC adapter for most PlayStation models is directly built into the system. The closest thing Nintendo ever did to that was the N64, where they stuck the AC adapter directly in its ass. Smart move, cowboy. Nintendo wasn't even as bad about this in the early days. Basically any old AC adapter and RF switch box that would fit in an NES and Super Nintendo would work as long as the voltages and frequencies were okay. And today everything uses HDMI, so it's not as big an issue for the Switch. Hell, I think the Switch uses USB-C, which means you can probably use some phone or laptop chargers. Well, the 3DS still uses that weird shit. I don't know. This whole proprietary cable nonsense is really dumb. It honestly reminds me of Apple. And if you don't know how I feel about Apple, well, take a guess. Speaking of proprietary hardware, get this. The Wii discs are basically just special Nintendo format DVDs, and the Wii U discs are just special Nintendo Blu-rays. Yet neither of these fucking consoles can play DVDs. Okay, look, I'm not an idiot, and in the grand scheme of things, this is small potatoes. Nobody was gonna buy a fucking Wii U to watch Blu-rays. But why the hell can it not do that? The thing that would make the most sense to me would be if it was some sort of licensing issue or something similar, or just the fact that Nintendo's sole focus tends to be games. You can do it using the Homebrew channel, which proves that it has the hardware to do it, but under normal circumstances it won't. But the fucking 20-year-old PS2 can play DVDs. Just 2 weeks ago, me and my friends watched Joker on the PS2. You'd think that maybe it would have occurred to Nintendo at some point, but nope. Now again, that's not a huge deal. A game console can live without DVDs. But let's shift focus to something more specific to games. Like, let's say, achievements. They don't have achievements. This isn't a make or break thing either, but come on. Everyone else has had them for years now. Who wouldn't want to go achievement whoring on Breath of the Wild? Show off to all their friends that they made it all the way to Ganon in 5 minutes and beat him without a weapon somehow. In terms of an online community, they're getting there slowly with the ability to link your Switch to Twitter and Facebook to share gameplay and stuff. But come on, I want achievements. When I waste my life playing video games, I want to feel like I'm actually achieving something. It's 2020, and it's time for everyone to applaud my mediocrity. Please. Every hardware generation for video games seems to have a loose standard for hardware that the main competitors try to aim for. In the case of Nintendo, every console after the GameCube pretty much abandoned this philosophy. Remember when the Wii came out in 2006? PS3 and Xbox were already going insane with graphically intensive games like Modern Warfare and all that fun stuff. And then you got the Wii version.
Aw, come on!
Now, graphics are obviously not the most important measure of how good games are, but surely there is an understanding that when your platform is underpowered, there are limits to what you can do. Of course, Nintendo themselves had a long history of using their hardware to the fullest, but it does still limit what other developers are willing to put up with, and even at this point, many devs have just given up trying to port shit to the Nintendo platforms, particularly since the Wii. Well, at least id managed to put Doom and Wolfenstein on Switch, which is miraculous, but a lot of devs aren't gonna go to that trouble. I know Nintendo is mostly known for its first-party software, but a hypothetical console that can handle its first-party titles as well as third-party ones, like they used to be able to do, would be much better than one that can't. And no matter how well optimized their first-party titles are, there is still a limit as to what they can achieve. Another serious shortcoming, especially recently, is that Nintendo does not equip its systems with nearly enough storage space to download a substantial number of digital copies of games. While PlayStation and Xbox can do this with fairly little hassle, every Nintendo system since the Wii, again, is still seriously under-equipped, forcing you to use physical hardware in most cases. And while I prefer physical hardware, a lot of people don't. The Wii specifically had so little space, in fact, that there were some multi-plat games that had DLC that wasn't even available on the Wii because it wouldn't fit. Now, to be fair, you can expand the storage of a Nintendo Switch with micro SD cards, which I discovered seemed to be more affordable than I thought, which is cool, but it's still an inconvenience.
My time's dropping fast, people. Boo! Time to upgrade to Wii U.
We can play Super Mario 3D World.
Yeah, look like I've been upgraded.
We already have a Wii, Sweetiekins. Here's you. Wii U is a total upgrade, Mother. Did you get younger?
Hot buttered popcorn, that's a thing. Yes!
Come on. Hey, little Bromeo.
What the fuck? It feels wrong to attack innovation in any capacity because that has always been what's driven not only video games but technology as a whole. But Nintendo has actually shot themselves in the foot in many instances in the name of innovation. I think this issue peaked at the Wii, once again. Every game on the Wii required the remote and tried to integrate motion controls. This was somewhat cool in some situations, like Wii bowling is the shit. But 95% of games on the Wii simply don't need it. Take Mario Galaxy. This game can easily work with a traditional controller. To prove it to myself, I played it on an emulator with a PS3 controller. It was every bit as playable, possibly even more so. Super Paper Mario was literally supposed to be a GameCube game to begin with. Now, some games did let you use other controllers, like Mario Kart Wii. Of course, they gave these special little badges to everyone who used motion controls to make them feel special for it. Yeah, well, fuck your badge and fuck your shitty motion controls. Nintendo has always loved experimenting with controls, like the NES Zapper or the Power Glove and whatnot. The difference is that the NES still had a standard controller that most of the games used, and the fancy controllers were intended for very specific titles. It's the Wii that had a habit of putting it in all games. The Wii probably represents the majority of the issues I have with Nintendo. But that aside, motion controls and such are not the only thing that innovation encompasses. Now, I've talked about Paper Mario to no end, but if you're new here, oh boy. So the first two Paper Mario games are legendary RPGs that managed to make turn-based combat fun. Super Paper Mario was a game that deviated heavily from the previous games in terms of gameplay, but managed to be great in its own right by preserving atmosphere and story. The developers wanted to go back to the old style with respect to both of those things, and Miyamoto told them no. Change the battle system for some reason. Also, no story, no interesting characters, make it rain toads. The games on the surface might look like the old style at a short glance, but many of the fundamental attributes of those games were either heavily bastardized or completely removed. Why? Because Miyamoto. His design philosophy is always to do new shit, which has worked as much to the benefit of many games as it has to their detriment. Innovation is a double-edged sword. If you do something cool that works, it's amazing. But if you use it to fix things that weren't even broken in the first place, you risk trampling the fundamental attributes of what made something great. It's not even like these Paper Marios are the worst things to ever disgrace this earth. But people expect something specific when you say Banjo-Kazooie or Paper Mario or Star Fox. If these games didn't try to sell themselves on the namesake of other pre-existing games, there wouldn't even be an issue. Like, what if Splatoon called itself Legend of Zelda Paint Fest and it was just the gameplay of Splatoon but with Zelda characters instead? People would hate it because that's not what people expect from Zelda. None of this means you can't make spin-offs. Of course you can. Paper Mario is a spin-off in and of itself, but it's become a series of its own with its own unique qualities. Games like Sticker Star or Banjo Nuts and Bolts or Star Fox Adventures were sold as and officially canonized as the next mainline games in their respective series, which is why it's a problem. The thing is, Miyamoto has been a massive creative force for decades now. Among Nintendo employees, he's often referred to as the top bitch. He's also 67 years old now, which means that simply as a human being, he's probably just getting a little cranky, you know what I'm saying? It's possible that he's just becoming more of a control freak, but after doing this for so long, there's no question that he's become a proud man as well, as he should be. This combination of factors could well mean that he's just more susceptible to getting stuck in his ways, developing an unwillingness to make compromises, and to be more invasive in the creative process of his subordinates. There's a rumor of a new Paper Mario coming up, and me and my friends agree that it would be best if he was involved as little as possible. And understand this, I don't hate the man in any capacity. He's done so much great stuff. I just wish he knew when to stop and let other people do their shit. Hopefully he'll learn.
Nintendo does not get online. Nintendo's the kind of guy still using Internet Explorer, you know what I'm saying? They're still over there using Ask Jeeves.
Now, we've already established that Nintendo has been behind on a lot of things. One of those things is online capabilities. The PS2 and the Xbox and even the Dreamcast all had online capabilities and many games supported it, while there were a total of, I think, 4 games on the GameCube that had online support. Maybe. Now this is humble beginnings and that's understandable, but then we have the Wii, which adopted this new technology called built-in Wi-Fi. Now they can join the rest of the big boys, except nope, no they can't. Friend codes. Yeah, we're talking friend codes. See, back in the 7th generation, you had PSN, you had Xbox Live, and then you had Nintendo Wi-Fi. Now, if you wanted to friend somebody on PlayStation or Xbox, more or less, you just had to search them up and send them a request. With Nintendo, you had to get your friend's fucking 16-digit friend code. Why? Why do you need to do that? I remember talking to someone in high school about it, and they said that it was probably a measure to make it more difficult for children to get into contact with creepy internet pedophiles. I don't know how true that is, but I will admit that it wouldn't be a bad motive. Of course, my philosophy has always been that parents should just fucking monitor what their kids are doing and not trust game consoles and television shows to be their babysitters. But Nintendo has always been the family platform. I mean, let's not forget that in the 90s, Nintendo was like the soccer mom of the video game industry, making sure that Duke Nukem had no swearing and that MK1 had no blood. Why though? Why'd they have to do that? The games were rated M anyway. For the longest time, Nintendo was the one non-PC platformer that didn't have a paid online subscription service. But of course, now they do. So yeah, great. At least they had the decency to be cheaper than the others and to give you a bunch of free NES and Super Nintendo games that everyone already bought on the Wii Virtual Console. One might be tempted to give them praise because they were the last ones to adopt this model, but they still did it, so bad Nintendo. Not to mention, this shit is slow. I have a funny story from a long time ago that I may have told before in one of my 10-hour long play videos. I don't expect most people would watch those, let alone pay attention to everything I said, so I'm just going to tell the story again here. I was at Fan Expo back in 2017. They had a demo for the new Assassin's Creed Origins that was coming out in like 2 months. I was with some friends and we were in line to play the demo. We were actually pretty lucky to have been let in, and halfway through the lineup, me and this other guy who was a bit younger than I was, we started a conversation about games, because of course we did. At some point one of us brought up Nintendo, and the second we said the word Nintendo, this big fat guy with a beard jumps in and starts losing his shit. And this might sound like a made up story, but let me assure you, that there is no shortage of fat guys with beards at Fan Expo. I should know, I was one. Now, specifically, this guy was yelling about how Nintendo is a complete dickhead when it comes to stocking consoles. Somehow, whenever they release a console, they're always in short supply. Now, that perplexes me because PS4 and Xbox One always seem to be in stock no matter what, and those consoles, especially the PlayStation, are extremely popular. Yet they never seem to have these short supply issues that Nintendo does. I remember when the Wii came out in 2006, I was in like the 3rd grade. Wow. Feels like only yesterday. My parents called like 19 stores in one day shortly after Christmas. Fuckers were all sold out. And that continued for like months until like May. It took a while. I know the Wii was a hot piece of hardware at the time, but come on. I have a hard time believing that Nintendo, a company whose sole focus is video games, has such a hard time doing this. In the case of the Wii specifically, it might have just been basic caution because of the sluggish GameCube numbers in the previous generation. At the same time, some people claim that it's just a business tactic of reducing supply to increase demand by making people think, oh shit, I gotta get it, I gotta get it, I gotta get it right now. I have no idea if that's even an optimal business strategy. It sounds oversimplified. But even if it is, load of shit. Just supply. You're Nintendo. You don't need to increase demand anymore. Have you seen what your fans are like? These guys are clinically insane. They're crazy. I should know. I am one. Again, I'm not a business major. I only know some shit from high school and I forgot most of it. There are a bunch of other factors and intricacies in charts and graphs and shit. There's factories and outsourcing and coordination and distribution. I don't know. All I know, and maybe this isn't even true, but all I know is that this issue seems to disproportionately affect Nintendo, even to this day, and I hope they figure this shit out. But who knows? Maybe they're literally just that popular and they can't keep it up. Or maybe it's a plot to get people to pre-order all their shit. Aw, I knew it. Now, this right here, this is probably the time where I seriously started to question myself as a Nintendo fan. Up until this shit started, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for so long. In the 2010s, game developers and publishers had figured out that the dynamic where a bunch of YouTubers throw up videos of playing their games was actually mutually beneficial. These people were giving them free marketing, essentially, and the creators made some money too. Somehow Nintendo missed that memo and demonetized the shit out of Nintendo videos. Then, they introduced something called the Nintendo Creators Program. If you joined this program, it meant that they take a good chunk of whatever ad revenue you were receiving and could only cover games that they allowed you to. Naturally, this caused a lot of people to just stop covering Nintendo games altogether. Remember, YouTube and Twitch are already fairly unstable sources of revenue, even if you're one of the big boys. You already have YouTube fucking you 10 ways to Sunday, and then another company who you are essentially providing free publicity to decides to take a substantial portion of whatever money you were making. What in the sweet name of shit does that even accomplish? Like, how much money did Nintendo manage to gouge from these guys by doing this when it was still in effect? I couldn't tell you, but I bet it's a whole hell of a lot less than they would have made if they just let the internet do its thing. The only thing that this really accomplished is proving that Nintendo absolutely has no clue how the internet works. Again. Alright, look, I understand that emulation isn't strictly legal, but there's something that companies like Nintendo have to understand. When games go out of print and you don't provide an alternative method of getting them, you can't bitch and moan about emulation. How exactly do you expect people to play N64 games? How do you expect people to play GameCube games? In case you haven't noticed, there are a finite number of those because they aren't in print anymore. If you're gonna flag down emulation sites and sue them for $100 million, at least use that money to provide these games on the Switch or something. Like, we'll pay for it. People already want you to do that anyway. Playing on emulators is something that people do out of necessity. They don't like doing it, it's not convenient, there's all sorts of bullshit you have to jump through and set up, but if they could pay a reasonable amount of money for the convenience to play them on Switch, for example, they would. This has been proven time and again. Somehow iTunes was really popular even though shitloads of people were pirating music before then. Somehow people still pay for DVDs and Netflix when they could just pirate all their shit. If you're gonna get angry at piracy or emulation, at least provide an alternative. Until you do, you're just gonna be waging a war against human nature. And human nature will win. I'm really happy that I brought up Disney at the beginning because Nintendo is another company that is notoriously protective of its intellectual property. I understand that fan games aren't strictly legal either, but when they're done right, it's not like they're hurting anyone. Nobody's gonna not buy a Switch because they can play Mario 63 on miniclip or whatever the fuck. A lot of the people who watch me do so because I talk about ROM hacks, which are basically modified versions of existing games. Games like Mario 64 and World are incredibly popular among ROM hackers, among many others. Now again, I know it's not exactly legal. It'd be nice if it was, but I won't hold my breath. The problem is when people distribute the base games for free. But for a long time now, ROM hackers have instead started distributing the patch files for ROMs and not the actual base ROM itself. As far as I know, those patch files are really the creation of the hacker, and since they aren't distributing the ROM themselves, and in most cases even own a physical copy of the game, they should be completely fine, right? Wrong, apparently. Even though ROM hackers such as Kaze and Manwar are only distributing patch files and not ROMs at all, Nintendo still feels the need to attack. Again, I know, copyright. But what is even the point? They aren't distributing your original game. Nobody's going to play this instead of buying actual Mario Odyssey. Are you out of your mind? There's something about this that really bugs me. Maybe it's just because I've been talking about ROM hacks for so long that I feel like I'm sort of part of the community. I don't know. But I'm just trying to figure out exactly what the mentality is. Do they seriously think this small handful of guys tapping away at their computers to make new experiences out of their games are doing it to steal money from good old innocent Nintendo? No. Compare it to what Sega did. For a while they were dicks about fan games, and then eventually they hired a group of fans to make a whole ass game and people fucking loved it. Would Nintendo ever do that? Doubt it. There was a guy who was making a Metroid fan game, which of course Nintendo cancelled, and while Nintendo probably hates this guy, the developers of Ori said, hey, this guy makes games, he's probably a good guy, and they brought him in to work on Ori too. Hell, what about Bethesda, the fucking laughingstock of the video game industry? For some perspective, this video has been me shitting on Nintendo, but if Nintendo was a bad company, I don't know what the fuck Bethesda is. These guys are pure and simple, complete and utter ass crackers, and yet, when people mod their games and shit, they don't care. In fact, they embrace it. I want Nintendo to move in that direction. Nintendo gets away with a lot of shit because of their longevity and the fact that they still make great games. And they still have an army of die-hard fans who are terrifying. I want to make an appeal to those guys. I know Nintendo has done so much for the gaming industry and have made so many great experiences, but goddamn, at least once, you tell these guys to fuck off, stop making sticker stars, let people make fan games, and bring Earthworm Jim 3D to Switch. Bye, bitch.